I was in my little house that I'd built in Minecraft, and I was looking out the window and seeing, oh, the sun's rising. So I went outside and I looked out over the horizon, and I thought, oh, that's awesome. I wonder what's over the horizon. And then when you go there, it just kind of continues. Minecraft just continues forever. It's a flat, pretty much infinite plane. And I thought, wouldn't it be cool if we just wrapped this round? What if we just turn it into a planet? You could run all the way around and come back to your house. You'd have a reason for having different biomes. So what I did next was boot up my favorite game engine, Unity, and start building. I thought, well, let's just go with cubes. Let's make the planet just a giant cube. Let's see how that is. So I started with this tiny planet to start with. You can see we can place and break blocks. Oh, it's just like Minecraft. But if I come over the edge, oh no, I'm just now falling for infinity. Gravity is not respecting what I'd expect it to do. So I added my own gravity in and got rid of Unity's gravity. And then instead of gravity just pulling you down the screen, I changed the down axis to be your position from the center of the world. So you're a vector from the center of the world. And that just means that you're always pulled towards the origin of the world. So in our case, the center of our planet. So let's load that back in and let's see what that looks like. So you can see the little capsule, which is the player. He's now able to run on the side of the cube. He can even go all the way under the cube, and he can come back around the other side just because he's always pulled to the center. But there is a problem though. When you're going towards the edges of the cube, it's like you're going uphill, and you can see it's like the hill's getting steeper and steeper. If we switch to the player's perspective, we should be able to see how this is even worse if you're trying to build. So you can imagine you're here on this edge of the cube and you're trying to build a house. It just isn't going to work very well. What we really need to do is smooth out the surface of the cube into a more spherical shape. So this little bit of code here just takes the points that we had from our cube and it maps them onto a sphere, and it also has a factor that we can take in to make it more or less of a sphere. So if we needed to make the corners a bit still cubey to make the game work a little nicer. So we're running about on our little cube sphere now. We can run all the way around easy peasy now, and there's not the tilting problem. We can place blocks, they place just fine. But they're all twisted now to the shape of a sphere, or close to. Still, if we're placing at these edges, we have some ugly looking blocks, like they're just not cubic enough, and building with these type of blocks would be horrible, especially because they kind of have two top faces. So then how does grass seem, say? So how can you have the edge of the block? It's bringing a whole nightmare of issues along. What we really need is another shape to solve this problem for us. But the shape we need is going to be a primitive solid because we want all the faces to be the same and all the corners to be the same, so the world is regular no matter where you are on it. So let's look at some others. Now the first one is the tetrahedron. This one's made out of 3 triangles around each vertex, but it's not very spherical. This will still make a terrible world. So its brother is the tetrahedron, which is the jewel of the cube, and is also, this one's not round enough for us still. But the icosahedron, which is made when you have 5 triangles around each vertex. Now this is already looking quite spherical. You can see we won't have to deform this shape very much to get it into a sphere. Also, we can subdivide this shape quite easily. I'll come back to that later. But a small issue I see with it is that the triangles themselves probably wouldn't make great voxels. We kind of want a bigger shape, or a shape with less acute angles on it. So we have the last primitive solid, the jewel of the icosahedron, the dodecahedron, which is made out of 12 pentagons. Now these look like they would already make okay voxels, but it won't subdivide easily, so see if we can fix that. Now I'm going to slide between the icosahedron and the dodecahedron. Swap the vertices for faces and swap the faces for vertices, and you'll get the other shape. I'll just show you this doing it gradually now. I'll slide between the two shapes so you can see them swapping over. And there we have it. There's the icosahedron, which is a shape we can subdivide easily. And now let's go back the way. Let's turn the faces back into vertices and the vertices back into faces, and we have our original dodecahedron. But if I stop just halfway, you might see something. Just a little more. Here they come. Can you see those hexagons forming between the pentagons? Now that just looks like a football or a soccer ball, and that's the kind of shape we want, just with a lot more hexagons between each pentagon. Okay, so let's look at the icosahedron again. Yes, and now we're going to subdivide it. This means we're going to divide each triangle into 4 more triangles. And we can, of course, recursively repeat that as many times as we want until we have millions of triangles. And the more triangles we have, the easier this shape will be to curve into a sphere, and the more voxels we can have on our planets. Now, if we look at the triangles, you can already see where the pentagons are. Each of those corners, you can imagine you can swap them for a pentagon, and in between, if you stack 6 triangles together, you can see the hexagons. So that will be the perfect shape for us to make our worlds, where instead of having cubes, we're going to have mainly hexagons. So here's a tiny subdivided world. It's now got all our hexagons. We still have some pentagons that you can see. There will still be 12 of them, but this is still way too small for what we need for our game. The worlds need to be way bigger. We want worlds that are at least at minimum size, a few minutes to run around. And I want to make worlds that, take a couple hours to run around and, perhaps days to explore. So to do that, I'm now going to have to start thinking very heavily about performance. So let's start writing some of that and see what we can come up with. So I've taken that world that was there before and we've now made it 3D. We've got some blocks that are coming up and out, and the player is now able to run around. Much larger planet, and we've broken the parts up into chunks so they can load in and out. The world at the minute is still static. You can't break or mine blocks, but it's a proof of concept that we can take this and bend it into a world, and we can see that the blocks look relatively regular. You can now run around the world as the player. We can look around. You can see we're on a tilt here compared to the horizon, as it's just the default skybox that's in at the minute. And we can run in any direction and it should load in. But you're seeing we're getting these massive lag spikes between each part. Now this is because the code's running just your standard Unity code and it's creating the meshes on the fly. And Unity just can't handle this. We need to do something about that. We're going to have to use a new coding system called DOTS. So at the time, DOTS was this new piece of technology from Unity that was still in beta access, and it hadn't been fully released, but it had some big promises. It promised you about a 1,000 times performance increase over your standard Unity code, which is something we greatly needed for this game. As building your worlds out of voxels, you can have billions of voxels that are loaded, and you need to process these really quickly, so then every time a player breaks or places a block, the whole world can be rebuilt. Now DOTS consists of a few pieces of technology. Now it's made with ECS, which is the Entity Component System, and this is a new framework for how you store your data in your game. So instead of using game objects, you can now use components, which means that the data can be all stored next to each other on the RAM, which makes it much quicker for the processor to process similar objects at the same time. And it also consists of the burst compiler. Now this lets you write C# code, which is normally run inside an emulation and runs really slowly, and instead turns it into machine code, which can run incredibly quickly and gives you a huge performance increase. Actually, this gives you the most performance increase over everything is burst. And finally, there is the job system, which lets you write multi-threaded code really easily, so you don't have to worry about race conditions and stuff like this, and then you can just have these jobs run in the background and then complete just before you need to display the frame to the player without causing any lag spikes at all. So let's give this a go. So after quite a lot of not functioning worlds and trying to get my head around the whole new ECS system and jobs, I eventually got this world working. Now we have some of the basic Minecraft features. We can place blocks, we can break blocks, that's great. We have chunks that load, you can fly around. And it's running quite smoothly, especially compared to the world that we have earlier. And there's a lot more going on here. It's not perfect though by any means. We've only got grass blocks and they're just a flat color and nothing saves. So if you run away from an area and run back again, anything you placed gets regenerated, which is not great for a Minecraft game. Now let's make the procedural generation a little more interesting. First we're going to calculate what biome we're in using the world position. Then we are going to use simplex noise to generate a height map. That's still quite boring, but it's a start. And then the same for the surface depth. And then finally we're going to do a tree check. So in the calculate biome, this is just using some more noise and the latitude to get an average temperature, so we get our biomes in the correct positions on our globe. Now the tree building, that happens in a different script. We just mark it and place a block to show that a tree needs to be placed there, and then we'll go to the other code. The structure builder just goes through the voxel buffer and it looks for where there has to be a structure to build, and then it simply goes through all the points inside that structure and replaces the air with those voxels. So still very basic. So now that's been implemented, you can see we have our generation in world and it looks a lot better. We can see our trees, we can still place blocks. We have a very simple inventory as well, so we can select what type of blocks we're placing, and it feels very smooth. We can break blocks and place blocks very freely now. I can break, and it just works nicely. What you can also see is we have a few different rendering types of the blocks, like the leaves are cutout rendered, and the water we could see before was transparent. This is the editor view, and you can now see the curvature of the world. You can see it bending around, you can see the different biomes. You can see the little player over there who's just a white capsule still, and you can see the trees that have generated. They're all the same, but that doesn't matter for now. It was more of a proof of concept, and the same goes for the biomes. You know, it doesn't matter that they're boring. It just matters that they exist. As we can add to that later. And I'll just drag the player around and you can see all the chunks loading in and out, and it's all happening super fast. Like, there's no delay there at all. They're just loading in. I felt like now I had a good proof of concept for the game, so I was now focused on the technical part. So this is a test world that I made which would help me with the coordinate systems for the game. Now with Minecraft you can just use the Cartesian coordinate system, X, Y, and Z, and everything's very simple. You go one direction, you go X, you go the other direction, you go Y. Simple. Whereas on a globe, we don't have that luxury because we have to wrap the coordinates round. So I had these different chunks. You can see there's blue and red chunks. They're actually mirror images of each other, where the X and Y coordinates are opposite. And then we have those one wide yellow chunks, which you can see between these blue chunks, and they're the edges. These come from the icosahedron we started with, and you can think of these as the edges of an icosahedron. And then at where they all meet, we have the pentagons, and there's 12 of them in the world, and these are the corners from the icosahedron. We also have these annoying triangular chunks you can see here at the end. These are just the normal chunks cut off, and these are actually really awkward to deal with. I also made these really crazy looking worlds. This was to help to make sure all the seams were correct and that the blocks were meshing together nicely, especially at chunk seams. So the blue lines actually represent the chunk seams. It's a little bit laggy, this one still, so the performance wasn't great, but the point of this one, as I say, was just about the meshing, and it looks kind of cool to explore. And here's the editor view. You can see it. It's kind of cool to see the curvature of the planet still, and you can see how crazy all the geometry is. And if we look from behind, you can see that it's all meshed correctly. I also made this crazy world. This is just 3D noise, and what's performance intensive about this world is every single block is doing a noise calculation. So normally you try and like flatten your noise calculation so it's doing it once per XY coordinate, not for every Z. So this is also doing it 512 times for every Z axis. This was a little laggy, but if I can get this running smooth, I know I'll be able to get anything running smooth with the game. So this was a goal of mine. So that's a good point to end the first episode. It kind of shows the initial concepting of the game and how the worlds were built and the proof of concept. And that actually ends the point where I was working on the game as a side project. After that, I started to work on the game full time. So in the next episode, I'm going to go more into the rendering and then how that works and then how we built out the kit to make the game, which is really cool as well. So if you've enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing. That helps us out. And also we have a Steam page, so you can wishlist the game now on Steam and you'll be able to follow the project along as it builds. Yeah, so I hope to see you in the next video and I hope it was interesting.